Welcome to the Psychedelic Passage podcast. My name is Jimmy Nguyen. I am your host today. Great to see you all. As you could tell from the background, I'm here in Amarillo, Texas. This is actually my first time in Texas, and I am down here chasing the eclipse. I'll be doing some harm reduction work with my friends at the Zendo Project for the Texas Eclipse Festival. And you all know me. I really do love recording this podcast, so I thought it would be fun to record a few episodes while I'm on the road. So thanks for joining us this week. I figured we probably are overdue for taking a little bit of a break from the content that we've been recording. I think that as I've looked back on the past several episodes, I'm really grateful for the topics that we've been having. We've talked well, we've talked about a lot of stuff from the nervous system to the role of fear in psychedelic experiences to a lot of different factors that I hope that have been not only informative and educational for folks, and also, I was feeling a little bit of a need to refresh our content a little bit. I think so much, much like the psychedelic integration process, so much of our work has been focused on learning and takeaways and frameworks and things like that. And one of the really important pieces of, I think, psychedelic integration work that I really share with my clients is the need to take a break, the need to switch it up a little bit. And so we're going to be bringing that energy into this podcast episode. And I thought we'd take a little bit of time to share actually a personal psychedelic experience that I had not too long ago. And so on today's episode, I'll be sharing a little bit about a psychedelic experience that I had over my birthday, which was just a few weeks ago. Some of the important takeaways of that, I'll spend a little time storytelling, as well, because I'm sure people are curious and it's not every podcast episode where I'm actually breaking down like what occurred during a psychedelic experience. But as always, we try to keep things informative, tangible, and actionable. And so I'll also be giving a couple of takeaways and some thoughts and ideas that might be helpful for folks as they may be thinking about a psychedelic experience themselves. So thanks for joining us, and really, really great to have you here. I guess the first thing I would say about this, psychedelic experience, which happened just a little over 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to make sure that I had enough time for myself to like settle and land and give myself enough time to kind of start, the integration process before I recorded this episode here. I think the important thing to mention there is that often I find that after a psychedelic experience, when you get too into storytelling too soon, what ends up happening is that you begin to craft more of a concrete and finite narrative around the events that happen. And even though that narrative is probably likely true to a degree, with any good storytelling, there's things that you include and there's things that you leave out. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave the experience what I call like enough space to breathe, enough for things to somewhat coalesce in a way where I wasn't like leaving things on the table as far as like my own processing. And so I wanted to make sure that I gave it enough of a buffer time. And certainly over the last several weeks, this experience has really been on my mind. So I'm really excited to break this all down here for you all today. But the first thing that I'll say is that I waited quite a while before moving into this psychedelic experience. For context, the last time that I had a psilocybin experience was, I believe it was like the fall of 2020. I had a solo 2 gram truffle, which was a like a mushroom chocolate experience. And maybe since then I've microdosed, I've maybe taken some, lower dosages. But after that experience, I ended up dabbling into other, psychedelic compounds and substances. For the past probably like a year and a half, I've had an intention, a calling to return back to psilocybin work. And for context, as you all know, if you've listened to this episode or this podcast before, is that my relationship with psychedelics started off extremely recreational, with psilocybin mushrooms being kind of my main love. And I am basically at a point now where I don't really even do mushrooms in public or recreationally anymore, just to give folks a kind of a juxtaposition on what it means for me if I'm choosing to step into a psilocybin ceremony. And so, on the heels of an ayahuasca experience I had about, I'd probably say like 18 months ago, a couple of months later, I was like, okay, I think I need to foray back into psilocybin work, but I was really open on when that would be, what that would look like, how much, and in the context of who. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think that there's a lot of folks out there who are feeling this calling, or they're feeling a sense of prioritizing, or they're feeling a sense of, like, I guess, urgency. And what I will tell you is that I tried my darndest to have this psychedelic experience sooner, and it just wasn't happening. I had had something scheduled in the summer of last year, and then some travel came up. And then I had another mushroom experience scheduled, I believe, for the fall, with a group of friends. And then that ended up falling through. I had another experience planned with one of our facilitators in our network there, kind of like teacher, shamanic practitioner. And then I got sick. I had another experience scheduled over a weekend last spring. I'm kind of working linearly here. And then that same weekend, my baby nephew was born. And so, what I'll share is that, even though I've held this intention, I've held this calling for quite some time. Not only was it that the cards didn't line up schedule wise, life wise, things like that, but more so I was kind of tuning into the energy of the psychedelic and the medicine. And it was just very clear that it was like, no, like, this isn't the time. You should wait. You should wait. You should wait. So I'm like, okay, I'll listen. I'll try to find the right time. And very interestingly, the intentions that I had on the reasons of wanting to move into those psychedelic experiences last year, I had some family things going on. I had some work and career things going on. I had some, relationship heartbreak things going on. There was just a lot of stuff in my life. And I was like, ooh, I got a lot of content that I'm going to bring into this psychedelic experience. And though there's certainly things that are still in flux in my life, I found this actually remarkable that by the time I had intended to move into an experience, a few weeks ago, largely most of the things that I was going to bring into the mushroom experience, the things that I wanted relief from, the things that I wanted clarity from, the things that I wanted answers to, largely most of those had kind of resolved or gotten to a place where they were moving on their own. And so I found myself a couple of weeks before a psilocybin experience being like, what am I even doing here again? like what am I bringing into the psychedelic experience? And I found it fascinating that by allowing like life to happen a little bit, I moved into the experience with a much more kind of like open slate. I think that for many folks, we harp all the time, and there's a lot of philosophy around setting intentions and being really clear on what you want and what you want to ask for. And though I think that that's important as far as container setting, making sure that your experience has like a thematic like purpose. I also find sometimes that people can be a little rigid about that, like too singularly or narrowly focused about their experience. And though I think that's largely healthy, one of the downsides of that is that it can limit the potentiation of unknown or new things to like pop up within you. So take that for what it's worth. I think that intention setting is certainly a balance of being clear and directed and focused, and then also having enough unknown so that the spontaneous can happen. That's like all of 2023, been trying to plan this experience, been trying to like figure it out, had dates ready to go, all of that. Things were, falling through or getting pushed on. And it's actually pretty awesome because last winter, and this must have been around December, I had this kind of spontaneous hit to ask a friend of mine to space hold or to sit with me, which kind of leads into the second, area of what I wanted to chat about today, which is what it meant for me to choose the right sitter. What was important in my experience was to find somebody who A, knew what they were doing, B, somebody who knew me in a personal or intimate context, like somebody who I had a good bond and relationship with. However, the juxtaposition was I didn't want somebody who was like in my life from on the day to day. I was trying to find somebody who knew me really well, but had enough like of a buffer from my everyday life that the things that I was going through, the content that was coming up, the things that I was processing wouldn't really directly affect them. Like they had enough familiarity, but like let's say something with work would come up. Well, I knew that if I was going to be in this space and process with them, that like whatever would come up with work, like wouldn't necessarily affect this person. And so it kind of reminds me of like the Earth's distance from the sun, meaning that there's just this perfect spot to where we get enough light and we get enough, energy from the sun. It's not too far away where it's too cold. It's not too close where things scorch. It's within what they call the habitable zone. So I was really trying to choose a sitter that was in the habitable zone, for me. And, luckily I found the perfect person. This is an individual who was essentially one of the founding members of the Zendo project. This is a person who I know has, for lack of a better term, like been in the shit, like been through the stuff, has supported folks through very, very challenging and harrowing psychedelic experiences. I knew that this was a person who was like just weird enough, not overly rigid. And, all of those factors, I think, played into me selecting a practitioner that I felt was, perfect for me, even though, admittedly, this person did not have a lot of one on one facilitation and sitting experiences. Now, I'm a little bit more of a unique, individual, being a co-founder of Psychedelic Passage, being a person who facilitates and stewards psychedelic experiences myself. And so let's just say I had like a really good baseline. And so for me, it felt like a good choice. Obviously, if you are newer to psychedelics, or let's say you need like a higher order of care, then maybe this person wouldn't be the right individual for you. However, given this specific nuance that I was looking of finding a friend in the habitable zone, it felt so intuitively correct. And so last December, asked them to hold space for me. They were very gracious to accept. And we had been, having some prep, moving into the experience that I had a couple of weeks ago. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it a little bit. I ended up doing a 2.5 gram chocolate that was gifted to me. And then ended up having about a gram of, fungi, dried mushroom biomass that we ended up grinding up, and then I experimented with lemon tech. So, for those who don't know, lemon tech, something that you can find easily online, as far as like information and things like that, is essentially using lemon juice to soak the ground up psilocybin mushrooms in there, and it does two things. I think the philosophy is that the citric acid and the vitamin C starts to like break down the biomass, and then starts that conversion process of converting the psilocybin into psilocin, which is the active, well, there's many active, compounds and constituents to psilocybin mushrooms, but it's the psilocybin and then that conversion from psilocybin into psilocin that generally initiates the active or hallucinogenic effect. So with lemon tech, it does two things. Well, three things. One is it starts that process, that conversion process. Two, the idea is that because it's kind of like, I don't know if it's enzymatic or not, but in my mind, I think like enzymes, like since it starts that breakdown process, oftentimes it can actually be less of a bio load on your stomach, meaning that your stomach is not responsible for doing all of the digestion. It's almost like a digestive aid. And this initiates two things. One is that typically the duration is shorter. So if you're looking at a psilocybin experience with an onset time anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. And then let's say that peak experience being somewhere between 4 to 6 hours. We're talking about a lemon tech ranging in the maybe the 3 to 3.5 hour mark. Now, even with just eating dried mushrooms, there's folks who feel an onset in like 10 minutes. And then also remember that it not only did I have a mushroom chocolate, but then I also lemon teched about a gram. So I ended up at about 3.5 grams. My onset time was pretty quick. I started to feel the effects in about like 15 minutes or so. What I'll share is that the duration of my experience, let's see, my dosage time was about 5 p.m. And I remember looking at the clock around 8:30 and feeling like the grips of the psychedelic experience was starting to release a little bit. But then I probably had an afterglow period of about 2 to 3 hours where I was definitely still like in an altered state of consciousness, but like not like actively hallucinating. And I've actually found that to be quite helpful as far as my own internal processing and things like that. The other thing that I'll say is that given the 3.5 grams, it certainly felt like more. Now, I was working with a rather potent strain of mushrooms. They were called hillbilly, which was cultivated here by a friend, gifted to me by a friend in Colorado. So it felt like quite a potent experience for sure. I would probably guess that it felt more in the tune of like 4.5 to 5 grams. However, I'll say that I had a 2 gram truffle mushroom back in 2020, and that like floored me. So maybe I just have like a more sensitive dosage or whatnot. And the pretty interesting thing with this psychedelic experience was that it felt like there were other like energies of medicine involved. I didn't do any ayahuasca and I didn't do any peyote, though there were times where in my psychedelic experience, it felt like an ayahuasca experience for like an hour and a half. And then there was a time where I felt more like almost like masculine disciplined presence of like peyote. And so I found it actually pretty, fascinating that though this was primarily a psilocybin experience, that I was like feeling the memory or familiarity of other substances that weren't a part of what I was ingesting. Now, of course, you have to try and do those substances for you to kind of know what's familiar and what's not. But just like, looking molecularly at a psychedelic like psilocybin, knowing that it's somewhat in comparison to other serotonergic medications or medicines, I just found it absolutely, fascinating. So I dropped into the experience pretty quickly, and very unfamiliar or unlikely to happen in psilocybin, but I very much felt like there were some other entities, other beings present, which was very similar to ayahuasca. So the best way that I can explain it is that I went through a spiritual astral surgery process. There was a time where these like entities that I was very familiar with, if anybody has done ayahuasca, I would call this akin to like the collective of like grandmother spirits. This came to me in the form of like these very like feminine spirits entities that were like kind of like hovered over me. There was this light kind of shining down. It's almost if I was on a surgery table. I really can't describe. It's a little hard to describe. I'm getting a little emotional thinking about this, but during that part of the experience, there was this like thing that was like getting extracted out of my heart space. And so I'm under a weighted blanket. I got, eye covers on. I'm generally, like pretty covered up. And so I recognize that the person who is holding space for me likely would not have been able to really see my facial expressions or whatnot. And I've described this in psychedelic experiences on the podcast before, but I was oscillating in real time. I'm like moment to moment from crying to like ecstatic laughter to grief to tears of gratitude to tears of sorrow to tears of joy, and like literally feeling all of these emotions like all at once. And that a part of that was what was getting extracted or pulled out of me. It was deeply, deeply, fascinating. And in the back of my mind somewhere, I'm like, I wonder if I'm freaking out my friend or my facilitator right now. I wonder if they like are thinking that I'm having a really hard time or a really good time. For what it was a really good hard time, basically. And my sense of it is that the emotions that I was feeling simultaneously were that was really what was on the surface. My sense was that there was something else, like another like layer underneath there that was getting pulled out of me that happened to be wrapped up in these emotions and these feelings, almost like this like water like surface on it, like the surface tension of water. And if you would like poke that surface or break the tension for a second, that's when an emotion or a feeling or whatever would come out. And this was a very, very, very delicate process that got pulled out of me. And so I'm going through this like spiritual surgery process. At some point, much like we've described in psilocybin experiences, it like comes in waves. So there's kind of these waves of intensity of which I was tracking over time was coming every like 45 minutes or so. And then I got kind of the message like, okay, you can get up and go to the bathroom now. Like go and pee and kind of, purge and let it out. That's going to be an important part of this process. But the message that I got was, but the medical procedure, quote unquote, is not over yet. So go take a break, go to the bathroom, whatnot, come back. There's more to be had. So I go to the bathroom, I come back, lay back down on my mat, and I started to have this inquiry. I was like, okay, I'm getting back under the quote unquote like astral knife. and and I'm gonna go, have more surgery. This surgical procedure is not complete. And I started to ask, and at this point, the visuals started to change for me. The entities, the ayahuasca like experience was somewhat like starting to fade. My closed eye visuals were starting to fade. It was very clear. Well, I was still having closed eye visuals, but they started to shift and transition into something else. And it was very clear to me that there was like a shift in the experience. And so I'm coming back, I'm a little bit more lucid. I'm, aware that there's this quote unquote surgical procedure happening. And I started to question and I asked internally, I was like, what is the nature of this surgery? I was like, is this the suture and repair process? Are you going to stitch me back up? Is there more to be extracted? Is this like setting a broken bone? Is this some type of an injury that I am, healing or repairing from? And no joke, I'm going to be kind of vulnerable here because I acknowledge how, like, honestly, like silly this is going to sound. I'm going to be very vulnerable here. But I got a message. I was like, you're going into labor. You're about to give birth right now. Now, I'm a cisgender hetero male. And you can imagine what was going through my mind about gender roles and gender normativity and heteronormativity. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a male who's about to give birth somehow, like through this psychedelic experience. And I would imagine that if I got hung up on that, if I got really like stuck on, wait, like, but people in male bodies don't give birth, but I'm a man. Like, what does this mean? Like, I can't give birth. And I would imagine that if I had a lot of resistance around that, then it may have actually impeded a really important and meaningful process to occur. And essentially what I can describe is that what I gave birth to was the entity or the essence that is psychedelic passage. And the best thing that I can say is that I very much felt like what was happening in that process was giving birth to something really new. And I don't have any kids myself, but I imagine that when a child is born, you think about all of the amazing things that that child might do in their life. You think about all of their accomplishments and you think about all of their goals and dreams and aspirations. You think about all of their mistakes. You think about all of their missteps. You think about all of the heartbreak that they'll go through. Think about all their friends that they make along the way. And you hope that that new child not only gets to experience all the great things that life has, but also hopefully that you get to protect and steward that child. And I believe that you dream about all of the positive impact that that child might have on the world. And so I use this analogy to say that very much so, I have all of those same dreams and aspirations and wishes and fears and concerns, but deep, deep, deep trust that psychedelic passage can step forward into something new, something that can really take what we've done in supporting so many folks, but then recognizing that there's so much more growth that needs to happen. There's so much more evolution that needs to happen as the psychedelic landscape is also evolving and shifting. And so I think I kind of became a father. And I'll also say that the birthing process was painful. It had this like almost like ancestral spiritual pain, but nowhere near the physical pain likely that women go through during, childbirth. And so, the experience was part focused on me I think the experience was part focused on, my staff and our team and our referral network of facilitators. Another really beautiful thing was I got to actually focus a period of my experience on some of my clients. One client in particular who has been deeply suffering their entire life, but greatly, greatly suffering and moving through what I see to be a really powerful and important process just a couple months after their psychedelic experience. And maybe it doesn't do anything, but I really chose to use some of the energy in my altered state to just send some love over to that individual. And I remember, really praying in the middle of this experience. I was like, if there's anything that I'm doing here that could even give like an ounce of relief and suffering to this individual who has suffered their entire life, I was like, then it would be worth it. Then it would be worth it. So that was my that was my psychedelic experience. There's obviously like a lot more to share. Though I want to take a couple minutes as we wrap up this episode just to talk about a couple of takeaways. The first for me is I was really proud of myself for just like trusting my intuition on what to do, in my body, in my mind, in my spirit, in my emotions, and how to navigate the experience no matter how weird it looked, no matter how weird it sounded, no matter how nonsensical it was at the time. There were times where I was like on all fours, taking on different, postures and, looking around. And I was so, so thankful that I had a really loving and non judgmental presence in the room with me, my friend who sat with me. And so I think that intuition can go a long way to be able to move through the experience unencumbered. I think the other takeaway was that the afterglow period was really important to get to really talk through things in live time and really to allow things to coalesce a little bit. I mean, admittedly, I live a very complex life and there's a lot of things like up alive for me right now, and it's actually been really great as I'm navigating through these big life choices that I've been just getting just some good affirmation, some good signs, whether in conversation or events that happened or whatnot, that are kind of like affirming, okay, here's the path that's set out for me there. And my other major takeaway is that I realize that despite well over 100, maybe 150 psychedelic experiences at this point, I'm really grateful for the intimate level of relationship that I have with these substances that I believe allowed me to drop in a much, much deeper sense. I'm not saying what I'm about to say here. I'm not saying that first time experiences don't have that level of depth. I've certainly seen a lot of clients who have moved through some deeply, deeply powerful and meaningful experiences. However, what I realized is that for many folks, when they're just kind of getting started with psychedelics, just the level of interaction with that psychedelic can be somewhat limiting and surface level because your first experiences are really just getting to know the medicine. And so a lot of people are coming into these experiences wanting these big, great, audacious things, which, like, I get it. There's a lot of people out there hurting. There's a lot of people out there suffering. There's a lot of people who need relief today. But think about this like dating a little. Like, if you went on a first date with somebody, you were just getting to know them, and then they were expecting you to move in together, have kids, buy a house, so on and so forth. You would think red flag, red flag. Oh, well, hopefully you would think red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag, right? Because the level of commitment is not commensurate to the depth of relationship that you're having. And so it's kind of similar to psychedelics, where you kind of might be on a first date with psilocybin mushrooms and you're coming in showing up saying, I want you to heal all of my childhood trauma. I want you to give me this relief from suffering and anxiety and depression. I want you to show me the pathway on where I need to go. And when it's your first date, you're like, whoa, 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 this is a lot. This is a lot to do. Like, we kind of got to get to know each other first. And so I just share that for what it's worth. This came to me in the middle of my psychedelic experience, and I really wanted to share this kind of sense with folks that when you're just beginning out or starting out with the psychedelic experience, sure, it's important to have intentions and desires and aspirations and goals the same that you would if you were going into a first date. Is this somebody that I can build with? Is this somebody that I can process with? Is this somebody that I can be vulnerable with? Is this somebody that I can be honest with? Is this somebody who can hold my stuff, my messiness and my baggage and my things? Because we're human. So we all have messiness and baggage and things. And I think that it was really powerful for me to reinforce what I've shared multiple times on these episodes about building a relationship with the medicine. Now, the cool thing is that most of these medicines work generally non-linearly, which means that oftentimes it's not a relationship of like years and decades. Not everybody has that. But what I share with folks is that it may take you a couple of psychedelic experiences. I get for some folks, it's like one and done. They're like, this is the experience that I have. This is the amount of time. This is a window of time. I got to get back to my life. I get it. But for those who have the privilege to, for those who have the access to, for those who have the capability to, I really hope that you consider what I'm speaking of, which is how do I build my relationship to these teacher medicines over time? That doesn't mean going back and having ceremony every month. Remember, it took me 3 years for my last psychedelic experience and then almost like a year and a half of planning for this one, microdosing in between and whatnot, taking lots of breaks in between as well. But I really, really do hope that everybody here listening to this episode and beyond gets an opportunity to build their own relationship with the medicine. And furthermore, to get to build a deeper relationship with yourself, one that is full of understanding, one that is full of love, one that is full of care, and one that is full of joy as well. So that brings us towards the end of our episode here. Thanks so much to all those folks who have, hung on and listened to me rant about my psychedelic experience. I hope that it was valuable for those folks listening out there. I want to end by reading a review that somebody has sent in as a part of our ceremonial program. I'll read this word for word here. They say, you are an absolutely incredible organization doing such important work. I'm so grateful I found you online and that I chose you and the facilitator to guide me through my journey and before and after. I felt supported, held, safe, and truly appreciated the videos, the prep and integration. I'm certain that these videos helped me feel safe and grounded during my journey, my first one. I'm beyond grateful for the work that you do. Thank you. Thank you. And so a big thanks and a big shout out to our community. That wraps up our episode. There's so many different ways to engage with us. You can check us out at www.psychedelicpassage.com. We have our blog, we have our podcast, we have our YouTube channel. You can find us on Instagram. You can see our comments in Reddit, threads, and communities. You can check all of that out by clicking the link in this description. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing you next time.